first of all, I have to thank for the invitation to speak, and particularly Patrick, who kind of led me into this. I'm afraid when Patrick asked me to do this, I really did think I'm a bit of a fraud because I don't know very much about AE as such. But I was relieved on Friday at the various talks that a number of people said that they were on a journey to find out more about AE, and I think I can tag on to that journey. I didn't know a little bit about AE growing up in Dublin. Of course, growing up I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, and it was the kind of the heroes of 1916 and that were more prominent. Pearse, Connolly, Michael Collins, De Valera, and so on and so forth. But every now and again, AE's name would sort of slip through the cracks. And I kind of was a member of the Irish Labour Party from 1969. And we knew that AE had designed the Starry Plough. And indeed, I can't remember who it was on Friday. One of the pictures showed this kind of goddess figure standing over a small cottage. And in the sky it wasn't quite the Starry Plough, but it was very close to it, And I thought, well, there's the kind of that idea. But it wasn't really until something particularly happened in Dublin, and I don't know when exactly this was, but Patrick might be able to help us. When I was in my late teens, early 20s, I was really amazed by a news item. The National Gallery of Ireland had bought not just pictures by AE, they bought walls painted by AE. And they brought these walls to the National Gallery. And then they, as it were, excavated the plaster off the back of the picture to preserve the wallpaper. And we're not too sure where the wallpaper is now. It's a bit of a mystery. I think the National Gallery seem to have lost it for a while. But at any rate, I mean, it was wonderful to see the pictures the other day of the surviving walls painted by AE and Ely Place. But the National Gallery certainly has it. I asked the National Gallery about this once, and they said they were a bit puzzled. But I then found an Irish Times article, so I didn't invent this story. And I remember myself seeing this wallpaper on display in the National Gallery. That would have been probably in the 1960s, late 1960s or thereabouts. But anyway, I just reminded by the famous quotation from Oscar Wilde about the wallpaper. And then Oscar Wilde, of course, grew up in this house, number 1 Merrion Square. But directly opposite across the square is this house, 84 Merrion Square, which is now called Plunkett House, and it was the offices of the Irish Homestead where AE worked. Now, Oscar Wilde had left, of course. In fact, I think Oscar Wilde was dead before AE really went to work there. But those tradition and the nearness of people. I mean, one of the things that always fascinates me about early 20th century Ireland or Dublin is how all these people knew each other. It must have been like a parish hall when they all gathered. They just all knew all the politicians, all the revolutionaries, all the writers, and so on and so forth. And they knew each other partly because they all lived on top of each other or very close to each other. Now, some of you will know this famous cartoon about AE and William Butler Yeats. AE is working in number 84, Merrion Square. Yeats is living in number 82, and the cartoon is a satire on the fact that they're going to visit each other, because Yeats has his head in the air, AE has his face down. They pass each other on the road, and as they're passing number 83 Merrion Square, and this is 82 Merrion Square, which is the home of William Butler Yeats, where Yeats lived. So they were just next door to each other. I used to pass this myself several times a day for about 10 years because I worked in this building, 63 Merrion Square, which is the home of the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland, and a very important building for Irish archaeologists. AE, who was a regular visitor to him and that whole area of Donegal, is also very friendly with the people who own Marble Hill House, the Law family. Isn't that right, Patrick? And in fact, We used to stay in this, what was called the Fairy House, which is in the grounds. I think some of you were visited. Was it last year you visited? By the way, I just want to, if anybody knows, the painting on the wall up there, I think that's a painting by Jack Yates, but I don't know if anybody recognizes it. But anyway, this was where AE used to visit, as well as visiting Arthur Kingsley Porter in the Grand House of Glenveigh Castle. He'd also come and stay here in the Fairy House at Marble Hill. And we have several paintings, lots of paintings he made of the area when he was there, including one of the so-called sacred mountains of Donegal, Muckish. That's Muckish in the background. And this is another painting, again, Muckish in the background. This painting actually is still in Glenveigh Castle. So, as I say, AE was, the 20s and 30s, AE was a regular visit to that area and painted lots of the local scenes, and many of them are still in public ownership in various galleries and that, including at Glenveigh Castle itself. Now, I have never found a painting he made of Errigal, and I don't know if anybody in the audience here knows, because it seems so obvious a thing to paint that, but I just haven't come across it. This is Errigal. This is where I live, actually. This photograph's taken in the back of my house, and anyway, it's it's too obvious a feature on the landscape to miss or to kind of to ignore. And I just use a quotation from AE in a letter he wrote to W.E. Yeats. And we heard a little bit about this on Friday, the sort of thing in his theosophy and his interest. And he says, the gods have returned to Erin, to Ireland, and have centered themselves in the sacred mountains. And but as I say, we don't know if he, at least I don't know if he actually painted Errigal. I'd be very interested to know. But one of his friends in Dublin, Robert Lloyd Prager, Prager was chief librarian, National Library in Dublin in the 1930s. A great naturalist. And of course wrote a marvellous book, The Way That I Went. And he says about Errigal ought to be a holy mountain, like Crowpatrick, but needs no association with a saint to make it an object of worship to all lovers of beauty. And I just used that little quotation, but again, Prager and AE would have been friends. I mean, would have known each other very well from AE's visit to the National Library, apart from anything else. And again, they were, you're talking about a very small area of Dublin, which these people lived and operated and all knew each other, In The Way That I Went, Prager's great book of travels around Ireland, he does have a description or a bit of talk about Slieve Gullion, and I just thought I'd put that on. He says, one of the many legends referred to Finn McCool ends on the shore of the little lake on the top of Slieve Gullion, where on the site where a magic drinking horn had disappeared. Is that the magic drinking horn? Not the horn you were playing the other day. Where this magic drinking horn disappeared, a growth of slender twigs grew up, gifted with the virtue that anyone who looks on it in the morning fasting will know in a moment all the things that are in store to happen that day. And it goes on. It's just one of the stories about Slieve Gullion. There's a bit more, but I won't go into that. But just to say that Lloyd Prager did, of course, write about Slieve Gullion as well as George Moore and so on. Now, I'm really going to talk about this area of Donegal, the kind of northwest area, Gweedore, Cloughaneely, that area. It's where I live myself. And in ancient times, it was the little territory, more or less where the circle is on the map. It was the little territory of a kingdom called Shilugdach, the Shilugdach, or the seed of the god Lu, Lulavada, also known. Now, Lu is often claimed as a sun god, but I think that's more or less discredited now. But he's very definitely associated with what I might call the fruits of the sun, the harvest. He's close, and I'll talk more about that. Now, a few years ago, I was writing this book, which was kind of to try to understand the archaeology and the mythology and the folklore of the area. And one of the things that I kept coming up against all the time was that Errigal, this extraordinary mountain in Errigal, in Donegal, that there's no lore, there's no mythology, there's no folklore about Errigal. Now that's impossible. I mean, there just couldn't have been this. In fact, I should say that I'm this photograph taken on the south side, and it looks kind of rounded on the top. If you go around to the north side, Errigal becomes an alpine mountain with a peak. Anyway, it's impossible to believe that this extraordinary feature on the landscape, that there were never stories about it, how it came to exist, its relationship with the gods and all the rest of it. But that's basically it. Now, other kind of mountains in Ireland, of course, are known as sacred mountains. I suppose the most famous of them all is Croagh in County Mayo. And almost certainly, in fact, I think we could say more than almost, definitely, certainly, Croagh was originally dedicated to the god, the pagan god Lugh, the man we mentioned a few moments ago. But then it's Christianized, and if you like, the story of Lugh is encompassed by the story of St. Patrick. And we see that the same sort of thing happening all over the place. And that's what I'll be talking a bit more about. Now, one of the greatest studies of the cult of the god Lugh, as it has survived down to modern times in Ireland, was written by a woman called Moira MacNeill, who was a daughter of Owen MacNeill, the founder of the Conradh na Gaeilge, one of the founders of Conradh na Gaeilge, one of the founders of the Irish Volunteers, and so on and so forth. Anyway, his daughter wrote this book, The Festival of Lughnasadh, which is a study of all the Lugh sites, all the sites in Ireland dedicated to the god Lugh. And I just put there, I can't read it at this distance, but he basically, she talks about Slieve Gullion, but basically says there's no connection between Slieve Gullion and the god Lugh. But she does go on to talks about the Cailleach, you were talking about the Cailleach, and a couple of other, is there a place called, let me see, Spellach, is it Spellach? Yeah, Spellach, there's the word there. Anyway, this is Moira MacNeill talking about Slieve Gullion and the area around here. But I'm going to leave you to read that for yourselves on another occasion. So anyway, this god Lugh was one of the kind of greatest gods from the early Irish tradition, mythological tradition. So who was he? His cult appears all over Western Europe. It's not particular to Ireland. It's in Britain, lots and lots of places all over Europe and Britain and Ireland are County Louth, Cunday Lugh. Carlisle, interestingly, in the north of England, possibly Leuven in Belgium, Leon in Spain, Leiden in Holland, possibly London, but if not London, certainly Ludgate Hill, where St. Paul's Cathedral stands. Anyway, his cult was widespread all over Western Europe, and there are various different stories about him, the god. And I just use as a parallel, I hope I'm not insulting anybody, but a parallel might be the sort of stories you see connected with the Virgin Mary in various cult centres, places like Lourdes, Fatima, Knock in Ireland, and so on and so forth. So, now, the Lugh story is widespread all over Western Europe. It's died out to a large extent, except still in Ireland, it's still preserved. But in Ireland, there are different versions of the story, but there's a particular version from the area that I live in the Gweedore, Cloughaneely area of. Now, the story was radically censored by the early Christians, and that possibly explains, for instance, why there are no stories about anybody, never mind Lugh, connected with Errigal. Errigal, the word Errigal, the name of Errigal. Errigal, of course, not just, there's Errigals in County Derry. I can't remember, several Errigals in Scotland as well. But it's a Gaelicization of the Latin word oraculum, meaning something like praying or prayer or something along those lines. Anyway, the story about Lugh that we see in various places, it's very fragmentary. but it still survives in some vague ways. That I'll talk about more. So we have to kind of reconstruct it. Now, strangely enough, we have virtually no imagery of what this God looked like in any way, but except for this is in St. Patrick's Cathedral, the Church of Ireland Cathedral in Armagh, and it's possibly, you'll see there's something odd about his arms, both his arms, and of course in Irish he's known as Lula Vada. There's all sorts of stuff about his arm, and also his around his head there seems to be a kind of a sunburst or something along those lines, and this reminds us that that he's associated in some way with the sun, or with the fruits of the sun, the harvest. And this is slightly better version of that. I mean, that's the last image was probably an Iron Age, probably around the time of Christ. This is a modern sculpture, just very close to my own house where I live in Dunlucha in West Donegal. Now, as I say, I live in Dunlucha, or in English, Dunluy, and Dunlucha means exactly the same thing as the name of the city of Lyon in France. Lyon, the modern French name, Lyon, is simply a contraction of the ancient Celtic Lugdunum. In Irish, it's reversed, it's Dunlucha, but it's exactly the same. So Lyon was originally the fort of the god Lu, and Dunluy, where I live, which is far from being Lyon, is the fort of the god Lu. And it's just an example of the use of the name. Now, Lyon is a very interesting place, but Lyon is built, modern city of Lyon is built where two rivers, the Rhone and the Saône, come together, and eventually the whole thing becomes the Rhone going off in that direction down to the Mediterranean. Originally, this was one of the centers. In fact, you could nearly say the Vatican of the Lu cult. It was a really major center of the cult of the god Lu. And up there on the top of the hill, that's a 19th century basilica, the Notre Dame. When they were building the basilica in the 19th century, they came across tons of archaeological remains connected with the feasting and the festival of the god Lu. Now, that is not surprising because, as I say, Lyon was certainly one of the great European centers of the cult of the god Lu. And Julius Caesar himself wrote about this. He talks about an unnamed Celtic god. He doesn't give him a name, but he says he is the inventor of all arts. And in Irish, Lu is called Savaldana, meaning he who has all arts or is skilled in all arts or something along those lines. So the Irish tradition of Lu Savaldana equates with Julius Caesar's description of the god presiding over Lyon. And then Caesar goes on to say that this unnamed god, he doesn't give him a name, that this unnamed god is the Celtic equivalent of the Roman god Mercury, who in turn is the Roman equivalent of the Greek god Hermes. And we could pursue those similarities. But just to say that Mercury, of course, is the god of trade and commerce and all of those kinds of things for the Romans. And it's where we get the word merchant. That's where we get the word merchant from the Roman god Mercury. Now, strangely enough, the west of Donegal, which is not the center of the world, it's one of the places in Ireland where we find Roman objects. Now, they're cheapo Roman objects. They're Lidl and Aldi Roman objects rather than Marks and Spencer's Roman objects. But nevertheless, they're there. You'd expect them on the East Coast. You find them on the East Coast, and, Tara, Newgrange, lots of Roman stuff down around there and various other places on the East Coast. But they're a bit odd up there in West Donegal. And one of the reasons we think they're there is because on the north side of Muckish, there is a quarry of snow white sand, snow white. It's very high in silica content, which is itself marvelous for making glass. And in fact, during the Second World War, it was exported for making optical instruments, binoculars and things of that nature. Now we used to think that the Romans only made glass in the Eastern Mediterranean, but more recently, archaeologists have found what they think possibly is a Roman glass factory in York, in England. And they scoured the world looking for sand to make glass. So it's possible that they were trading. This is Mercury. Remember, Mercury is a version of Lu, the god of trade and commerce. And that in that area, there's this is a drawing of, or it's a kind of a reconstruction of Ptolemy's map of circa AD 150. And up at the top there, you'll see Dunfanaghy, modern Dunfanaghy. And there are various interpretations of what the word means. But one possibility is the word Fionn there, an earlier Celtic form there behind, which is white, or so that these are kind of the white people, or it's the fort of the people of something connected with white anyway, and the white is probably the white sand. Now, back to the continent for a minute. When the first Roman emperor Octavianus becomes emperor, he develops the city of Lyon. In fact, becomes the center of one of the Roman provinces of ancient Gaul. And he seems to have absorbed what was then a local cult around Lyon into his cult as the Roman emperor, the Augustus. And then as the Roman emperor, he was the Augustus. And then in the year 8 BC, the 6th month of the Roman year, Sextilus, was changed to become the month of the Roman emperor, the Augustus. And that's why in English and in most European languages, we have the month of the Augustus. Whereas in Irish, we still retain the older name, the month of the god Lunasa. Now, I don't know, maybe it's somebody here, but no, I don't know if that's actually a continuity or if it was just a revival. Did somebody revive this in the month, the name of the month, was it revived in the 19th century? But at any rate, if you're ever asked, why do we have in English the month of the Augustus, the god, the Roman emperor god, and in Irish, we have the month of the ancient Celtic god Lu. That's the reason. You probably all know all these. These are the 8 main festivals of the Celtic year. Samhain, New Year's Day, is the New Year's Day of the Celtic world. And there are 8 festivals, 4 main festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Baltana, and Lunasa. And halfway between, because the year is divided into exactly the same, segments. The winter solstice is halfway between Samhain and Imbolc, the spring equinox halfway between Imbolc and Baltana, and so on and so forth. So the year is divided into 8, and you have the 4 main festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Baltana, and Lunasa, and then they halfway between each of those are the main events of the solar year, the equinoxes and the solstices. And how do they know? How do they work this out? Well, they use things like this. This is the Beltany stone circle just outside Rafo in Donegal. It's a circle, and it's about 80 meters across. And just outside, you might see up there's a single standing stone all on its own outside the circle. And this is a plan of it. By the way, this plan was made by Admiral Boyle Somerville, who was a brother of Edith Somerville, the writer Edith Somerville, an extraordinary man himself. He did that in 1908. The plan has him, sorry? The Irish RM. The Irish RM. His sister wrote the Irish RM, but he was a fascinating man in his own right. Anyway, he did the survey. The survey hasn't been better. With all the modern equipment available now, that we still haven't a better plan of it than his. He was in the British Navy. Anyway, he worked out that the circle and all the alignments, you can see there the alignments with various, the Samhain sunrise and so on and so forth, various sunrises. So in other words, anyway, I was talking to kids in the school recently, 12-year-old, 13s, that sort of age group. And I could see that they weren't exactly enthralled by everything I was saying, and they were all looked a bit bored. And somehow I was inspired by the spirit of AE or somebody, because I had that slide and I showed it. And I said, by the way, that is the oldest and the biggest, and then I used the word computer in Donegal, and I used the right word. The kids all woke up when I said computer. They weren't just old stones, but anyway, back to Lu again. Lu is a very important god. He's, I say, his cult is widespread all over Europe, and here in Ireland. The classic version of the story is in a text called, usually known in Irish as the Second Battle of Maturin, and has been described as the most important Irish mythological tale, because virtually all the gods and goddesses and heroes of Irish mythology have at least a walk-on part in the story. They, flit in and flit out, but they're at least they're mentioned. It only survives in the 16th century manuscript, and the text seems to be 9th century with some 11th century additions, but the story almost certainly is Iron Age going back. And it's a universal story. This is the form it takes in Ireland or in Europe, but it's the same story, or parts of it are the same story as, for instance, David and Goliath in the Bible. It's the good versus evil story, which appears in almost every culture in the world in one form or another. Now, in Donegal, there's the Second Battle of Maturin is the classical version of it, the literary classical version. But then all around Ireland, there are various local versions which survive in folklore and things like that, and some of them have been written down. In the Clonelia, the Donegal version, was first recorded by John O'Donovan of the Ordnance Survey in 1835. It was recounted to him by a man from Tory Island, Sean O'Doohan, and O'Doohan would have definitely told the story to O'Donovan in Irish. Unfortunately, we don't have the Irish text, we only have the English text, and O'Donovan kind of polished it up a bit, if you like, as a literary thing. But anyway, such as is, we have it, and there's Tory Island, and the story, the main story, is the conflict between the evil bad Balor, whose dún or fort is at the east end of the island, and the good god Lu. Lu is the good god. Balor's the evil god, And the main elements of the story is that Balor, who's the evil god, he had one poisonous eye. Who was talking about the third eye the other day? But Balor's third eye was evil. Anyway, Balor has a daughter called Ethna, and Ethna is Balor's told by a druid that he's going to be killed by his grandson. So he has to make sure that Ethna never gets pregnant and has a son. But in the nature of things, a spirit brings out a man from the mainland out to Tory, Canfeilet, and Canfeilet gets Ethna pregnant. She had 3 babies, only one survived, and that's Lu. And then when Balor learns this, he comes to the mainland and he kills Canfeilet. And then when Lu grows up, he in turn kills Balor because Balor had killed his father. That's the basis of the story, Anyway, the story is very strong, still very strong. I mean, you could meet people in a pub that tell you they met Lu last week almost, This area of Donegal, the story is pervasive. It's everywhere, in the monuments and the names, in the story. And it was actually, it was a little kingdom, the little kingdom of Síologhdach, or the seed of Lu. That's just the kingdom there. The brown part is more or less modern Gweedore. The green part is, especially where all the dots are, is Gorta Horca. There's Errigal at the bottom and Tory at the top. And I kind of think of them as the north and south pole of this little kingdom. As I said earlier on, although Errigal itself, there's no lore has survived about Errigal. Errigal is literally a Christian name. Now, when I was a child, everybody had a Christian name and a surname. I think Christian names have been dubbed, and we now have first names. But when I was a kid, what's your Christian name? You would be asked. And Errigal is literally that. It's a Christian name. The mountain, whatever pagan beliefs there were about the mountain prior to, have been Christianized, a layer of Christianity. And Errigal is then given this name, which is borrowing from the Latin word oraculum. Anyway, so Errigal is what I call the south pole of this little kingdom. Tory Island is the north pole. And on the east end, which is this end, the end that gives its name to the island, Turlough or Towery, there is a fortification, a promontory fort, what we call a promontory fort. So this photograph is taken inside Dún Ballar, looking across the sound to the mainland. There's Errigal and Dún Luithia, or the Fort of Lugh, beside it. And the fortification, I don't know if you can see there the ditches and banks that define the Dún Luithia. On the mainland, if you go across the mainland, some of you will know this, there's the area called Cloughaneely, Clough, or the stone of Keneally or Kinfeilid. That was the name of Lugh's father. And remember, Ballar kills Kinfeilid in the story. And according to the legends and the local folklore, it was on this stone that he killed him. And the stone is a block of white quartzite, but there are black veins in the stone. And these are supposed to be fossilized. Kinfeilid's blood has fossilized into the... So a mile or so down the road is this cross, Rye, it's pronounced Rye. And I think it's the oldest, the earliest of the circled crosses in Ireland. I think it dates to about 800. And you might see that in the cross, it's very hard to date these crosses because we date crosses, as you probably know, on the basis of the art on them. It's the sculptural detail that allows us to date the cross, but there's virtually nothing on that. But there are, in the stone of the cross, there are these inclusions of white quartzite. And in kind of my imagination, or anyway, I kind of see the cross as we're crushing the white pagan stone. And anyway, that's a slightly mad interpretation. Now, the whole area is, as I say, filled with stories about Lugh and Ballar and the conflict between them. This is the Poison Glen, so will you note, in Irish, Glan Niva, or even Crow Niva sometimes, but is it Niva or Neva? And some of you will know that Niva is poison in Irish, whereas Neva is heavenly. So is it the Poison Glen or is it the Heavenly Glen? And that argument has gone on for 1,000 years. But anyway, at the base of in the Dinchanicus, the place lore, the valley is carved out when Ballar's evil eye is pierced with a spear and all the poison oozes out of his eye and carves the glen. But then there's a huge stone. It would be at least as big as this room. Cloughahattan at the base. This is it there. Anyway, it's a huge stone. It's a glacial stone dumped there by the ice in the Ice Age. But in the folklore of the area, Ballar's head is put on the top of the stone, and the poison splits the stone. So. Anyway, what I'm really trying to convey to you is that you can't move in this part of the world without encountering an aspect of the story of Lugh. Now, what happened to that? If this was a really powerful set of religious beliefs, you see, but Christianity comes along, and Christianity, just as there's a layer of Christianity put on the mountain by changing its name, so also the stories themselves are Christianized. And Columkill, who of course is a real historical person, no doubt about that, but is also, to a large extent, a fictional character, just like St. Patrick. There's the real St. Patrick, and then there's the fictional St. Patrick. There's the same with Columkill. There's a real St. Columkill, and then there's the kind of fictional Columkill. But anyway, in this part of Donegal, Lugh effectively becomes Columkill, that's partly facilitated, at least in the stories, by the fact that both their mother's name was Ethna. Remember, Lugh's name was Ethna, Columkill's mother's name is Ethna. And there's all sorts of aspects of this. For instance, Balor is killed with a spear thrown at him. And there's this local story. Some of you know that this area. It's just above where you get the pier. The pier where you get the ferry out to Tory Island, Cruchlanev, the Hill of the Saints. And the story is that 4 saints gather and they have a competition as to which of them is going to convert the pagan island of Tory, because there's always something negative about Tory. Tory's black, Tory's evil, anyway, so they have to convert it. So the 4 saints gather and they have a competition. And the competition is that they get their bachel or their crozier, their staff, and they all fling them at Tory. And whichever one reaches Tory. Of course, Columkill is the only one that reaches Tory, so he gets to. But that story, and where the other saints' staffs fall, churches are founded. But basically, the story of Columkill throwing his staff at Tory is a Christianization of the story of the young Lugh throwing the spear at his evil grandfather. So. Yeah, okay. So I'll just to say then that many of these stories about gods and goddesses of ancient Ireland from the mythology sort of reappear or survive, but with a Christian veneer over them. And Lugh is the great example of that. There are all over Ireland there are various saints which have these L names: Lochtan, Lochthin, Lochan, Lugad, Malacha, Malua. They're all versions of Lugh's name that have been just Christianized. And one of the great treasures of Ireland, some of you know this object in the National Museum, is called St. Lochtan's Arm Shrine. And Lochtan is almost certainly a Christianized version of the god Lugh. And remember, one of Lugh's classical names is Lugh Lámhada, Lugh of the long arm. And there's his long arm. It's interesting that type of shrine is common in various parts of continental Europe. Later, this one is much earlier than the European ones. And normally, if you go to places like Cologne and that, you'll see them in museums and in cathedrals. But normally on the continent, the hand is raised in a blessing, whereas here we have, the fist. Thurn Sanerd, that expression that was Thurn Sanerd. So that now the other thing I really should have said, that one of the explanations, a friend of mine, Patrick McCafferty from Lochanure, and Patrick has written a book about kind of the Irish gods as astronomical things, things in the sky. And Patrick and a few other people would argue that Lugh and his law of Ada is actually a comet with the trail streaming away from the comet. That's his law of Ada, his long arm. So I fly through this. Oh yeah, in this part of in this area of Donegal, the local saint is called Saint Begley of Tullaha Begley. And again, he's a local version of Lugh. Almost certainly his name meaning Begleach, little warrior, or even possibly Beglu, little Lugh, as if the god Lugh has to be pulled down to where, the great god is pulled down to be a little Lugh, Beglu. Then this local kingdom is formed around all those beliefs. Sorry, I just, I'll skip. Now, out of these people, she looked up, come the famous O'Donnell and O'Doherty family. And they just to go back, they would have started in, this small kind of remote, fairly, you know yourself if you've been to Gweedore, it's not exactly the royal territory of County Meath. The land is pretty poor, but they spread out from there. This area of North Donegal, of Cloughaneely, Gweedore area, is steeped, even to the present day, in these stories about Lugh, the god Lugh, and the effect. And let's see, can I remember? This is Tullaha Begley, the churchyard. Tullaha Begley is its current, or at least its medieval Christian name. But up to 1320, it was known as Tullaha Lugh, the mound of Lugh. Again, the god Lugh precedes the Christianization, and then a Christian layer is put. I don't know if you can see that. There's the mound of Lugh, and there's a kind of in front of it, there's literally an amphitheatre. And almost certainly this was where the kings of that territory would have been inaugurated or crowned. You have to imagine people sitting all along here, looking at the ceremony. The mound is a kind of a stage, and then behind the stage, there's all these mountains, Errigal and so on. I think I have a slightly better. These lines are pointing at places in the landscape here, and there's the mound. This is the amphitheatre, and then Errigal Mountain, Tullaha Begley itself. Another mountain here, Carntraina, which is part of the Lugh story. Beltany, part of the Lugh story. And if the slide went on around here, you just see kind of Tory. So there's a backdrop behind the stage, if you like. And you have to imagine that when the king is being installed, we're talking about now the 6th century or something, the Druid will recite, probably in verse and poetry, he will recite the story of the god, and he'll be able to point out the places where all the different episodes of the story happened. So just to, I suppose I'm out of time. So just to say, to go back to AE, and AE, I don't know whether the spirit of these gods is still alive in the landscape, but certainly the memory of them is. And very often that memory is just hidden under a thin veneer of Christianity, which we're able to strip back and see the original stories. So I might stop there.